Welcome to Tech Startup Stories, hosted by Natalie Binns. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the B2B startup world.
Hi, I'm Natalie Binns, and I'm the host of Tech Startup Stories. This podcast is really designed to share the unique and challenging journeys of all the people that are building small startups to scale-ups in the tech space. My background? Initially, I was in sales, and then I moved into marketing, and I've been lucky enough to work with some amazing tech companies. But my passion is really startups. And that led me back to helping tech startups set up their marketing and go-to-market functions where the budgets are tight and the resources are few and far between. So let's get into this week's podcast. Hi, Kalina. Great to meet you. I know we've spoken briefly, but I'm excited to have you on the podcast today. Why don't you tell us all about you?
Thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast. My name is Kalina Tonkovska. I am the CEO and founder of Programmatic. We are a UK-based company that specializes in document and contract automation. What our platform does is very briefly automating contracts. So think of it like DocuSign, but what happens after you sign.
Great. So you're all about documents, and obviously it says that on the top of your screen there, turning documents into actions. How did you get into that? What kind of spurred your ideas and kind of made you go after that as a business idea?
Right. So 2 years ago, I was working as a software consultant, as a product manager. And we were working with many big companies in the UK, and a lot of them were asking for a way to automate their contracts. They were having a lot of overhead, specifically around COVID. Contracts were having these dynamic clauses, so they had huge admin teams following up on them. And after a few projects, we realized that we might as well do a product, and that's how we started. We dedicated around a year for research only, and we've spent a year on R&D.
Wow. And I'm sure it's pivoted a number of times in that time.
Many times actually, because once you start from a user feedback, you kind of go into that loop and everyone says it's great. But then I think there might be a bit of a negative on that part sometimes because you tend to get attached too much to user feedback. And I always go back to that quote. I think it was, if you ask people what they want, they would say faster horses. They wouldn't say cars, right?
Yeah. I think that was Henry Ford, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So obviously with the pivoting and all of that feedback that you've been gathering over time, has that changed who you would see your ideal customers as? What's been the journey in understanding who would be the perfect customer for programmatic?
It's definitely been a long journey. So when we started with Programmatic, it was obvious that it is the medium to big size companies, so enterprises mostly, that are in need of a tool like Programmatic because they have the majority of overhead, paperwork, and admin. With time, as we were developing the MVP, we were looking for early adopters. And so we found out, obviously, it's much harder to sell with an MVP to an enterprise, even for a pilot. So we tried to do a pivot towards smaller companies. But then we realized that the smaller companies, they have their own way of doing processes and they're not really burdened with heavy processes. Everyone knows a small company, they have their own way of doing things. They're not looking to standardize or automate because every day is a new way of doing it, right? So I think this was a little bit of a pivot that we did. And recently we came back to our original ICP, which is complex, medium to big size companies that are really struggling with their operations.
Of it. You mentioned the word "we" a couple of times. I know that you've grown the team. You've got a development team in Sofia. I know that you are a UK-based company. Who is this "we" you talk about? Is it you at the helm and a bunch of technical people? Do you have a co-founder? Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we have a development team that is based in Bulgaria, where I'm originally from. This is mostly who I refer to when I say we, but we also have a lead investor from the UK who is also actively involved in how we're growing Programmatic.
Got it. So you're not completely alone. You've got some great advisors around you, which I think really helps. But I think you've done a startup before, haven't you? This isn't your first rodeo, so to speak.
No, it's my third startup actually.
Oh, wow. And what have you done before?
So that's a funny story. My first startup, it sounds a bit cliche, but it was out of high school. I was trying to find work as a freelancer, and I really hated all the platforms that were available out there. And so I created a platform for freelancers. And I did it only with one other person, so it was a lot of learning back then. It wasn't really that successful, so we kind of abandoned the project. But then that led me to developing a second startup with the same founder, actually, that I started the first one with. And that company is still operational. So they do they're doing digital advertising and digital solutions for companies in Southern Europe. That still is something that's a little bit behind in Europe, I think.
So third time lucky for you personally, although you've already had some great successes already. What kind of key learns have you brought with you from those previous sort of journeys to where you're at now?
I think the biggest one is just not compromising on quality. That's something that I've gotten a lot of advice from people that don't overbuild your product, don't focus too much on quality, push something out, and then you kind of iterate back and forth. And while I think there's a lot of merit to that, I think one of the things that are making the best product, one of the reasons people create great products actually and build great products and why customers love them is the quality. So I've made the mistake of compromising on quality with people and with processes and so on, and trying to do it the way, let's say, enterprises would advise. And I think this is my biggest lesson from everything.
Interesting. I always like to focus on progress, not perfection. That's my kind of mantra. But I think when it comes to the product, making sure that it is still a quality product is important because people are paying money for it, aren't they?
Yes, I also think that this is something maybe a little bit specific about me. I'm a product person at heart, so I love to make things that are perfect. I want to know that what is being released is perfect. And I think nowadays, when it's so easy to create products and you don't really need a 50-person team, you can do, we currently have 5 people in programmatic. We used to be a 10 plus people team. Now we're just 5. And we are extremely productive. And I think in the era of where you can build very huge, big businesses with less people and less resources, I think quality is something that people should focus on.
Absolutely. So tell me a bit about that journey where you had 10 people and now you've gone sort of down to the 5. Talk to me about what happened there.
Um, so we had a very big team, well, very big for an idea stage startup of 6, 7 people. We grew to over 10. And the people were coming from our parent company. So we had a parent company when we started, industrial technology, and then we kind of shifted into um, um, separating from them, let's say. And so we've decided to remain a smaller team and focus only on core features and core R&D. And what we found is that that really helped us narrow our focus, and it helped us deliver a lot more higher value deliverables, let's say, within the product. For me, that was a hard thing to do, to separate with a big team, especially as a person who is looking at how much we can deliver as fast as possible. But I think it was a good thing.
I think you've proven the less is more in that example.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I also saw on your screen that you've got, some values there or your mantra of keep it simple, be resourceful and take risks. Tell me a little bit about why that's so important to you at Programmatic.
So when we were the 10 people, over 10 people team, we were looking at what kind of values we can kind of declare so that everyone can follow them. And then each task or each feature will be delivered within those values. And obviously, when especially when founders start thinking about it, they want to say a million things like be perfect, do it ideal, do it fast, and so on. But these were the things that we were struggling with the most. So we decided that these would be the three things that we would abide by, let's say. So keep it simple. This is because we were overcomplicating and over-engineering very simple things. And this would come within the discussion of following user feedback. We were having a lot of discussions with companies and they were saying like, oh, we need this and we need that. And we were trying to make everything happen. So this is why we implemented Keep It Simple. And this came with also a very short delivery cycle. So we reduced the delivery time from 2 weeks to every day, which was a big change. And this helped us a lot. And then the second one is be resourceful. We started as a startup, obviously, like any company does, but without really big funding. So we had to think of very creative ways to make certain things happen, especially when we cut down to a smaller team, which happened maybe it was Q3 last year. And this was a time where we were launching our almost production version. So we were doing a lot of user testing, a lot of marketing, which you would know of how to do good marketing in a crafty way. It's hard.
Yeah.
It takes some talent. And then the last thing, take risks was also important because majority of people in our company came from project background. And this is, I think, a very big issue when you transfer from a project company to a product company. It's a completely different way of operating. And so we had some days where actually a lot of days where the team was asking like, what are the requirements? And they were mistaking user feedback for actual requirements. And so we had to get out of the zone a little bit. And this is an interesting thing. We implemented something called Greenfield. Well, I'm calling it like Greenfield under a very tight deadline process, let's say. So we would say you have a very tight deadline, let's say a week to deliver something out of scope of what we're trying to do, something that you think would bring value. And we've seen actually a very huge uptick in high quality deliverables within the product. This is actually also how Spotify introduced one of their biggest features. One of their engineers came up with an idea for, I think it was the generate radio.
Yeah, I love that feature. I use it all the time. It's one of my favorite features in Spotify. I think it makes sense to have your team come up with being, with that resourceful angle to be creative and come up with new ideas. And often that's when the best ideas come up, when people are trying to, create something different and, thinking outside of the box, so to speak. And on the risk side of things, everything in a startup is a risk. We know this. And from the minute you start right the way through, breaking away from your parent company, that's risky. And, one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about is that out of all the people that I've spoken to and that I meet as part of this podcast and also my own personal marketing clients, there's very few female CEOs in this B2B tech space. So not only am I super blown away by how amazing you are, but I also know you're in a man's world typically. How do you deal with that? What have been the challenges that you faced as a female or as an individual, and you're not sure whether that's because you're a woman or not?
Oh, do you have 2 more hours for this?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow. I was actually recently thinking about this due to Barclays Female Founder Accelerator. I read this horrifying statistic that only 2% of funding globally is going to women, with a little bit of variance between US and Europe, but mostly the same. And I think this is a huge problem. I think I've encountered a lot of issues as a woman. I don't want to sound like a victim in any way, but we do really encounter a lot of sexism. I've personally also encountered a lot of ageism because I'm quite young for what I'm doing, I guess. And yeah, as a woman, it's very hard being on a board with only men. It's very hard getting through that idea stage, and I feel you're perceived very differently when you're trying to defend a product hypothesis. I think we women also, we tend to feel a lot more insecure about how we are handling things. So I think a lot of problems also come from within us. And I've actually worked very hard on trying to fix that, from simple things like how you write your emails. There's this recurring joke that you would have to remove all of the exclamation points and reduce the size of the text by twice. I think starting from small things like this and feeling comfortable and confident to just declaring something to how you negotiate terms is very, very important. So yeah, I guess this is the short version of it. It's very hard.
Wow, there's a lot there, and to be honest, I think the statistic speaks for itself, and I wonder whether part of that is because women are less likely to take that risk because they have their own insecurities, and they say to themselves, "There's no way I can do this," and even though, I mean, when I look at you, you've got a great business idea, you come from a product background. You're obviously a very smart, intelligent lady with, clear experience, but the female side of that is kind of irrelevant to what you have. It's really the fact that you are building a great business. Unfortunately, because you're a woman, you face other challenges that kind of have been coming up. How do you kind of focus on your confidence and self-belief? Do you surround yourself? Do you have a great network of women around you? How do you combat that kind of self-doubt?
I think that would be great. I don't really have enough time for social gatherings, unfortunately. But one thing that I'm very, very grateful for is my mother. She is a very strong female in the corporate world, so she's helped me a lot. I find myself, even to this day, very often calling her and being like, "How would you advise me I act on this situation? And have you encountered anything like this?" And it's very helpful. I think a support system is very important. But even if you don't have, there are just so many groups nowadays. I remember when I started my first startup out of high school, there were no groups for support, almost no groups for support for young entrepreneurs, none for women, at least where I was from. So I think nowadays women should just reach out and try to get help. One thing I've found is that you always get a response back and somebody helps out. So
I agree. I agree. And I know that you mentioned ageism, and I've spoken to other people, men as well, that have this challenge. And I think when it comes to age, is there ever a good age to be at in business? It seems to me that, if you just go on LinkedIn today, there is you're too young to do these kind of jobs, to run this business, to do XYZ, or you're too old. And there's a lot of people in my network who are really struggling to have the commitment or the opportunities that perhaps younger people have because they're considered too old and past it. And so is there a right age? I'm not convinced that there's ever a good age, when it comes to the tech industry, because everything's constantly changing and evolving and adapting. So you're either not experienced enough or you're too experienced. And I can't see that there's the perfect place to be. I mean, what do you think? Kalina?
I think you're right. There is no perfect place, but there is a time where you would be better perceived, especially when trying to secure funding, for example. There's so many steps where you need support in the beginning, which people don't really think about a lot. And if you are subject to ageism, whether you're too old or too young, it will be very hard to get past these. And different regions have varying levels of difficulty. So again, where I'm from, originally from Bulgaria, this is a huge thing, and you really need to work very hard. I know I did, both in the corporate and in the startup world, to kind of gain a little bit of traction and help myself along. But I'm sure it's the same in other countries as well.
Absolutely. So tell me what your vision is for Programmatic. Where do you see the business going in the next year or two? What's next for you?
So we're just getting started. That's the good thing. And for programmatic, I think the next 5 years will be really fundamental for how programmatic changes the way people operate. And I know this is such a cheesy line. Everyone says it, like, my product will change how people work and how they operate. But the reality of what I've seen in the last 2 years of research is people, or not people, rather operations is really broken in most companies. I've worked in operations and I know I used to spend more than 40% of my week on admin stuff. And people don't really perceive it as such initially, but then they realize it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, it's a waste of opportunities. And surprisingly, nowadays, when you talk to people about their contracting and how they're doing it, most people would say, oh, we use DocuSign or any other signing software, right? But then you talk to people, even in companies, big companies like Salesforce, and not only, and there is no visibility on what happens when after a contract is signed and how it ends. Like, how is the deal actually executed? How are the terms that you signed actually executed? From operations to sales, there's no visibility. So vision on programmatic is changing this. We want to make sure that there's one place that really gathers all this information and provides good insights and monitoring. And long-term vision, we want to create the first autonomous operations. So operations that really can start to end, initiate workflows, have adaptive actions. We already have this in our platform, starting from the contract and ending with the project ends.
Got it. Got it. So you're pretty busy. You've got plenty to be going on with. And I know from our conversations, you spend a lot of time at airports, traveling back for. When do you actually get time to relax? Do you ever relax?
Honestly, in the last 2 years, I haven't much, but I think that's normal with startups. I am planning to do so maybe next year at some point. But yeah, it's crazy. This year, we want to expand into the States, both with funding and with sales. So I'm probably going to be expanding my airline routes to the States as well. So
Got to get those miles racked up.
yeah, at least one upside to everything.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I guess my final question would be I think I feel like we should just focus on the ladies. For any women that are listening to the podcast, and totally inspired by you, you know, what advice would you give them when they are perhaps thinking of taking the plunge to becoming an entrepreneur and building a business like yourself, but haven't quite, hit the button yet?
Just do it. I think I think really there is no other way around it. I think a lot of women question themselves a lot, and I know I have, and I think you should just go for it. And I'm sure that other female founders will say the same thing that I will say. Looking back on it right now, I can see that it doesn't really matter. As long as you have tenacity and you focus on quality and you're there for it in the long run, just a little bit better every day, you're gonna make it. So it's okay. Really just go for it.
Love it. Well, we'll just steal the Nike brand and tell people to just do it.
It's a great tagline.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kalina. It's been fabulous. I'm excited to watch Programmatic continue its growth journey.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Tech Startup Stories. Have a story you'd like us to share or a topic you'd want to cover? Reach out and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.